The administrative fund is for your annual or ongoing expenses. It covers things like general repairs and maintenance. Any payments that you make regularly or the body corporate makes regularly are coming out of the admin fund. The fund is annual, so it's not a savings account. And that means that, in theory, at the end of the year, the fund should be back to zero. So you collected what you needed for the year, you spent it, and you're back to zero. In practice, it's a good idea to have some surplus in the admin fund. So that would cover things that come up out of the blue that you're not aware of when you're doing the budget at the start of each year. And as I said, we budget precisely based on the spending pattern. So if something like your insurance premium goes up, the levies would need to go up to cover that increase. And that's what people often, they ring and say, why are my levies going up? And the answer to that is, well, most things go up by at least CPI each year. So the admin fund covers those sorts of things that tend to go up in line with inflation and annual spending. This is an example of a budget that we put together for the admin fund. So at the top of the page, you can see the levies. So this body corporate was raising $66,000 in levies, and an additional $7,000, which was for an insurance-specific levy. And then these are the types of things that the admin fund would pay for. So we've got bank charges, community power, which is the common area lighting, for example, consultants fees, which might be things like if the body corporate needs to get legal advice or needs to talk to council about something, that would be like a professional fee. Fees and permits are similar. Fire protection is servicing of extinguishers, fire doors, hose reels, any fire equipment that they have. Income tax returns. Bodies corporate have to lodge a tax return each year, just like a business does. And so if the body corporate pays tax on money interest received from a term deposit, but they have to declare the levies to the tax office as well. So that's a fee there to lodge the tax return. Insurance is pretty self-explanatory. Insurance valuations are done periodically to make sure the building's insured for the right amount. And then we've got some categories for repairs and maintenance. So these are things that are annual type repairs and maintenance. Gutter cleaning, if we get an electrician out to fix an intercom or something like that, that would generally be an administrative fund expense. Next slide. This is the second half of the page. So you can see management fees, so that's the fee paid to capital to look after the body corporate for those owners. We've got pest control, which should be fairly self-explanatory. Disbursements is the cost of things like envelopes and paper and postage. So the way that the body corporate management company charges owners is very different to the way a property manager does. So property managers charge a percent fee based on the rent received, as I'm sure you all know. And that should be a fixed fee that covers most of the things that you do. So if you have to contact a tenant, I'm pretty sure most of you wouldn't then charge that phone call separately to the owner. That's just part of the fee that you charge generally. And so we work quite differently. And just for your information, we work a fee based on the number of lots in the scheme. So if you're in a 6-lot building, 6 units, the fees worked out, it might be $130 per unit per year. So it's not a huge cost. And then we charge additionally for things that we do throughout the year, because it can be, night and day from one year to another. Whereas property management should be fairly steady unless you have something go wrong. So disbursements are charged, postage and phone calls and things like that. We've got some software licensing fees. Resident manager contract is for buildings that have an on-site management team. So often there might be a caretaker. Those are usually larger buildings where you have someone on site who looks after maintenance, and the body corporate pays them an annual fee. Swimming pool maintenance should be pretty self-explanatory, and workplace health and safety, and that's a statutory report that the body corporate has to do to make sure the building is safe. So those are some of the things that contribute to the admin fund spending. And you can see down there at the bottom, there's an administrative fund balance of $8,000. So if we, 6 months through the year, we might need to get legal advice, which hasn't been included in the budget. If we've got a balance there, we can spend some money without needing to go to owners for a special levy. If there's no money there, then that's when owners start to get special levies for things that need to happen but aren't included in the budget already. Sinking fund is the other fund, and this is totally different. So this is the long-term savings account. So levies here are based on the sinking fund report, and they're not based on the spending for that particular year. So we don't just make those up, and the owners don't. They get a a quantity surveyor to provide a report on the building that says you're likely to need to paint it in 6 years and the roof might need replacing in 15 years. And then they work out the levies based on those things that are coming up. And they give us an annual list of levies. So, 2015-16 might be, $1,000 per owner. Next year might be $1,100. So we set the levies based on that report. And then I've got an example of the sinking fund budget. So at the top there, you can see the total sinking fund income is $27,000. And we've got some money coming in from a term deposit. So the money that the body corporate has in its account, we can invest that, and then that money is paid back into the body corporate as interest. And so this year, look, we're raising just under $30,000. We're only budgeting to spend $6,000. So a lot of people say, well, look, I'm paying all this money into the sinking fund this year, but nothing's happening. And the reason for that is, we might be saving up for painting in 3 or 4 years. And a lot of people that doesn't click until you point it out to them, that, in 3 or 4 years, the painting's expensive, but you're still just paying your standard annual fee. There's no extra coming out of your pocket. And you can see there's some fire equipment. If we have some major fire work, we would pay that out of the sinking fund. Some other maintenance issues. We had an insurance claim, so there was some money coming in from the insurance claim and money being paid out. And yeah, that's basically the sinking fund. Some common complaints about levies. So one that we get all the time is that capital's charging too much. And so as you would have seen from the previous slide, the amount of money that's paid to capital as a business is not the same amount of money that they pay per quarter. So owners pay for the administrative and the sinking funds, and then out of the administrative fund they pay capital as a business to consult to them and give them advice. Owners vote on the budgets and levies each AGM, so every owner gets a copy of the budget in advance, and then they can vote yes or no to accept that budget and those levies. If they're not aware of it until they get the bill in the mail, then they're probably not getting their mail, so that's something that they need to follow up with us. I've said levies are not paid to capital. We're a small part of the budget, and some things have a huge impact on levies, like insurance. If you've got any managements that have been storm affected by that big November storm, that had a big impact on the insurance premiums for those buildings, and so the levies have to rise to cover those new insurance premiums. We get a lot of complaints about levies being high for a small complex, and I've got some dot points that seem really straightforward, which is that all owners pay levies, and larger complexes have more people to share the cost. And a lot of people are under the impression that larger buildings are more expensive because they've got things like lifts and pools. And I've just given you an example there. We do have lots of buildings with pools, and some of them are large and some are small. And I'd say the average cost of a pool to run is $2,000 a year. If you've got 20 units in the complex, each owner is paying about $100 in their levies towards that pool. And if you then go down to a smaller complex of 10 units, each owner has to pay double. And if you go down to 5 units, each owner has to pay 4 times. So you might think, oh, it's a small complex of only 4 or 5 units, but in some cases the smaller complexes have the highest levies because they might have a lot of equipment, they might have fire equipment that other buildings don't have, and they have less people to share that cost burden. Another one we get is people comparing levies from one scheme to another, which is very difficult to compare. If you've got 2 identical buildings side by side, in theory they should be relatively the same levies, but things like fire servicing has a huge cost implication, and a lot of older buildings don't have fire equipment, so that's really something that's ramped up in the last 20 years. But if you manage a block in an old brick 6-pack, they probably don't have fire extinguishers or emergency lighting or sprinkler systems or any of that stuff. So that has that means that those older buildings generally have lower levies. Some plan types don't include building maintenance at all. So this is common with townhouse complexes. You might see that levies can be really low for some townhouse complexes, but in fact, those levies don't include things like painting or maintenance in the sinking fund at all. So in 6 years, when they have to paint, that owner might actually have to pay the $15,000 for their own townhouse out of their own pocket. So it's difficult to compare then, because some schemes save up over time and some don't. And also insurance, and this is one that's really underestimated by people, is that some buildings can have really different insurance costs. So Susie can probably tell you that we have a lot of trouble getting insurance coverage for timber buildings, and that's probably becoming more popular now is to see like feature timber cladding. Timber is not fireproof, so it catches on fire and insurers don't like it. And particularly we see a lot of buildings where there's been a house at the front that's been renovated and some townhouses in the back. And the house at the front is might be an 80-year-old Queenslander. And because it's part of the body corporate has to insure it. And so that would be really expensive insurance for that building. And all owners would share the cost of that insurance. On levies, so most of you would pay at least some levies for some of your clients. There are consequences for not paying those levies by the due date. And these aren't consequences from us. These are consequences in the legislation. So it's not us doing it, but it is in fact the law that if an owner has not paid their levies by the due date, they lose the right to vote at the AGM. So if your levies are due on the 1st of September and there's a meeting on the 5th, if you haven't paid that levy yet, or it's caught up in your end of month processing, then the owner whose levy you're paying, they can't vote at the AGM. They can't join the committee. And so if they miss out at that opportunity, they can't then join the committee for the next 12 months. So you can actually sort of accidentally ban someone from being on the committee by not paying their levies on time. They also lose the right to nominate someone else for the committee. So sometimes a husband might nominate the wife, or they might nominate the owner of Unit 5 to be on the committee. They also can't do that if they're unfinancial, which means they haven't paid the levies on time. And then there's the normal things like late fees and also penalty interest. So a lot of schemes charge interest on the balance that's outstanding, and that generally doesn't kick in for the first 30 days, so there's a bit of a grace period for the interest, but all of those ones above still apply. So that's important for you, because I know where I used to work, we had mid-month and end-of-month processing for creditors, and if a levy notice came in, I would think to myself, oh, that'll be okay, it's only going to be 14 days overdue, but in fact there can be some consequences that you might not think about. And we have had some property managers lose managements because they haven't paid the levies on time, and then owners have not been able to vote on their own motions at the meeting. And it's embarrassing, I can tell you, if you're in a meeting to say to people, sorry, you can't vote because you haven't paid your levies. This is just some advice that we think it might be relevant to you. So if you're paying levies on behalf of an owner, consider withholding some funds, and I know most of the software you use can do that. And so that would then be a buffer, so that if a levy notice comes in, you can pay within the 30-day notice period and adjust for your payment schedule within your own office. And also, if you get a levy that is not going to be covered by the rent for that particular month, then we suggest you contact the owner of that unit and suggest to them that they pay some money into your trust account, or pay the levy directly, or part pay it. Because as I said, some owners won't care and some owners don't vote at the AGM, but for the ones that do, it's really important that those levies come in by the due date, and it's a hard deadline for the due date. And that's it.